that we're not going to make the same mistakes with India that we made with China 20 years ago. We're going to let you, be able to develop all these markets, and then the next thing we know, you're beating us in a lot of commercial things. We're going to make sure that whatever we do, it's fair to our people of India. It is, I think, important to have these kind of dialogues and events, and particularly at this critical moment in U.S.-India relations. I thought I would talk a little bit about our foreign policy vision in the Trump administration generally, and then pivot to the U.S.-India relationship specifically as an example of some of the points that I made in the more general presentation. One of the things that President Trump has done, whether you like President Trump or do not like President Trump, is that he has empowered those of us in the U.S. government to think about some fundamental assumptions about foreign policy that honestly had not been subject to much debate or dialogue for many decades. If you think about it, the world that emerged after World War II had a very clear vision for American foreign policy. In around the world, whether you're talking about Malaysia or Montevideo, Uruguay, or Malawi, we were seeking to contain the spread of communism in the Soviet Union. And that was the unifying principle in American foreign policy. India had obviously adopted a pretty clear position in that of trying to balance between East and West and really fomenting the non-aligned movement to try to avoid taking sides in that conflict. And then, of course, as we know, in the early 1990s, almost overnight, the Soviet Union vanished. And somewhat strangely, there was never an assessment at that point in time of the purposes of U.S. foreign policy in the post-Cold War world. The United States, had this massive military and diplomatic footprint that it never had historically, again, all around the world. And instead of coming up with or really having an important national or international debate about what the purpose of U.S. foreign policy was post-Cold War, we just kind of let it all happen by default. There was never a moment of reckoning to say, what is the point of U.S. foreign policy now? Right? Ever since Pearl Harbor, really, when we got wound up for World War II, and then went right into the Cold War. So from the early 1940s, really through the early 1990s, for a period of 50 years, we had a very clear understanding of what we were doing around the world. In the last 35 years, really almost as long as the original 50 years, we really have not had any kind of vision about what we're doing in the world and what the point of U.S. foreign policy is. And President Trump, with his America First foreign policy, has made it very clear that our objectives are to make our country safer, stronger, and more prosperous. Now, that doesn't mean that we don't want to do things that also advance the interests of other countries, but it recognizes that we in the American government, the purpose of foreign policy, of United States foreign policy, is to advance our national interests. We are not a charity organization. We are not the United Nations. And it is important, I think, the work of diplomacy is to find the win-win situations when you say this is one country's interest here's another country's interest. We have to find the area in which those two circles converge. And, you know, that, it seems to me, is a very important point that we have been, you know, lost in terms of what is even the basic objective of foreign policy in our country. And so we have made this very, very clear that this is the goal. And America First obviously does not mean America alone, because some of the ways that you can accomplish those objectives are through cooperation with other countries. So, you know, I think some people have kind of very superficially said, oh, well, this is an isolationist foreign policy. Not at all. Again, our country is not safer and stronger and more prosperous, walling itself off from the world, but if we, insofar as we are engaging with the world, we have to be able to explain to our own people how we are making our country stronger again through those kinds of engagements. And frankly, we expect other countries to be pursuing their interests. You know, so if, just as President Trump wants to make America great again, he would expect the Prime Minister of India or other leaders to want to make their countries great again. Though, you know, national sovereignty is ultimately the basis of the international system. Although many people have, you know, declared the death of the Westphalian system for many years now, you know, we very much, we are organized as a nation state. We have a constitution, and we expect other nations to behave the same. You know, concurrently with the drift in the substantive objectives in American foreign policy in the last several decades, our foreign policy had become increasingly bureaucratic and no longer subject to the desires of the president, who is, after all, the elected representative of our people, and who has the control over foreign policy under Article 2 of our Constitution. We have seen that basically our whole foreign policy process was really more concerned with the process itself rather than the results it would yield. And so we had for many years, you know, high-level dialogues and summits, and everybody would give themselves awards and say how great it was and congratulate each other, without actually looking to how are we serving the interests of our people. Ultimately, we have to be able to go to our people and say, this is what our foreign policy has achieved for you. This is how it makes your life better. And frankly, this is not something that President Trump came up with on his own. This is what, frankly, goes back to the earliest days of our country. If you read what the founders of our country wrote about foreign policy, they talked primarily about the importance of commercial intercourse with other countries and how that was important to foment our own prosperity. You know, the United States has been blessed by geography with you know, relatively few neighbors compared to many other countries, and we have less concerns about land invasions from our neighbors in other parts of the world. So, you know, we can really focus on economic diplomacy and commercial diplomacy as a key objective of our foreign policy. And President Trump has brought that back to the fore of U.S. foreign policy in you know, a return to our first principles. And he personally has taken on a key leadership role in foreign policy. So it is not some anonymous desk in the State Department that is making the important decisions, but they're really coming out of the President and the White House and reflect the President's own political agenda rather than a, let's say, a deep state agenda that kind of remains the same regardless of who is in the White House. So, you know, I think that my thesis here is that over the last several decades, American foreign policy had kind of descended into a kind of a toxic brew of moralism and impotence when we felt that we would go around the world lecturing people about values, but But then, frankly, when other countries would do things that were very much against our interests, we would just, express concern or issue a strongly worded letter. And, President Trump has made it clear that, he wants to be the president of peace. He has made it a real priority and a point of pride that he has gone out of his way to help resolve many conflicts around the world, frankly, because the international system that we inherited had not been up to the task. And so he is personally doing that. And I think a lot of this is just, going back to, very basic common sense of just what is the challenge and how do we get things done. And I think it is an indictment, in a sense, of the foreign policy establishment of the last several decades, that there's been a lot of talk about problems, but frankly, not a lot of solutions. And we kind of fallen into a trap of, if a country does something we don't like, well, we'll issue sanctions, and then everybody can feel virtuous about that without any real discussion as to whether the sanctions were appropriate, whether they were having their intended effect. So he has given us, in a sense, the freedom to reassess our relations with many countries and see, how do we advance our interests in a way that also advances those countries' interests. So what does that mean with respect to a relationship like India? I think one of the things that is undeniable is that this century is going to be, in many ways, a century that we expect to see the rise of India. And it's in our interest, and we think it's also in India's interest, to be partner with India's interest. This is a country of almost unlimited potential. It's now the world's most populous country. It has incredible economic, human resources, other resources that make it one of the countries that's going to decide the future of this century. The United States very much wants to be part of that and think that we have many, many win-win situations with India. And so, there's a reason that I am here today, which is I want to highlight the importance of India as we look around the world in the 21st century and see, what are the relationships that we really want to cultivate. And again, I'm not here, to do social work or charity. I'm here because it's in the interest of our country, and we think it's in the interest of India to deepen our partnership. And it has to be obviously based on reciprocity and mutual respect. We are very excited about the trade deal that is almost at the finish line now, and think that can be the basis for really unlocking almost limitless potential. And so we are very much excited on focusing with India on these economic and commercial opportunities. And so, but again, India should understand that we're not going to make the same mistakes with India that we made with China 20 years ago in terms of saying, oh, we're gonna let you, be able to develop all these markets, and then the next thing we know, you're beating us in a lot of commercial things. We're going to make sure that whatever we do, it's fair to our people, because ultimately we have to be accountable to our own people, just as the government of India has to be accountable to its people. So again, I think on the commercial economic front, it's incredibly bright. I think at a more general political level, we have two leaders in our two countries who have forged a great relationship. I think they really think the same way about putting their country's interests first, and it just seems very logical that we are going to be deepening our cooperation, and it's very important that our two countries can build on this personal bond. I think in these next few years, we can really set the stage for decades of very close India-U.S. cooperation. I hope we can kind of move beyond the Cold War model where, India, feels compelled to kind of keep the United States at arm's length. I think we can, again, cooperate very, very forthrightly in areas where we have very many common interests, which are many. I mean, I will briefly just mention the security area. I think the United States and India have, very coextensive interests when it comes to preventing terrorism, when it comes to ensuring freedom of navigation on the high seas and elsewhere. And so I think that, we are seeing some changes in the U.S.-India relationship, cooperation in defense and other areas that I think would have been impossible, some years ago. And I hope that that's an area that we can continue to lean into. I think the energy cooperation possibilities, again, are limitless. So I think it is no accident that the President sent really one of his very closest advisors, Ambassador Gore, as ambassador here. The President really understands the value of this relationship, and again, I'm delighted to be here today to celebrate this relationship, and I really am grateful that you gave me a few minutes just to talk a little bit about our vision for foreign policy and look forward to continuing this discussion. So thank you very much.